The transport shuttle shuddered as it docked with the Galactic Senate orbital station. Ambassador Day-Ho looked out the window at the massive structure that hung in space like a silver crown. He had seen pictures before, but nothing prepared him for the real thing. The station was enormous, with hundreds of docking ports and towers that stretched in every direction. "It's bigger than I thought," said Jiwoo, the junior delegate sitting beside him. She pressed her face against the window like a child seeing snow for the first time. "Do you think we're ready for this?" Day-Ho smiled at her enthusiasm. "We've prepared for 2 years. If we're not ready now, we never will be." The truth was, Day-Ho felt nervous too. Humanity had waited 50 years for this moment. 50 years of being watched and tested by the alien species that made up the Galactic Senate. Now finally, Earth had been granted provisional membership. Today would be their first official session. The docking clamps locked into place with a heavy thud. Day-Ho stood and straightened his suit. It was a simple black formal outfit, the kind diplomats wore on Earth. Jiwoo wore something similar in dark blue. They had debated what to wear for weeks, finally deciding that simple human clothing would make the best impression. The airlock door hissed open. A tall, thin alien stood waiting for them. Its body looked like it was made of blue crystal that caught the light and threw rainbows across the walls. Day-Ho recognized the species from his studies. This was a crystalline, one of the founding members of the Senate. "Ambassador Day-Ho, Representative Jiwoo, welcome," the alien said. Its voice sounded like wind chimes. "I am Senator Vexthal. I will escort you to the Senate chambers." They followed Vexthal through corridors that curved and branched like the inside of a nautilus shell. Everywhere Day-Ho looked, he saw aliens. Some walked on 2 legs like humans. Others floated or crawled or moved in ways he couldn't quite understand. The diversity was overwhelming, but one thing caught his attention immediately. Every single alien they passed wore armor. Some wore full metal suits that covered them from head to toe. Others had energy shields that shimmered around their bodies like soap bubbles. Some wore thick plates on their chests and backs. The armor came in every color and style imaginable, but every alien had protection of some kind. Day-Ho glanced at Jiwoo. She had noticed it too. Her eyes were wide with confusion. "Excuse me, Senator Vexthal," Jiwoo said carefully. "We weren't informed about any dress code. Should we be wearing protective equipment?" Vexthal stopped walking and turned to face them. The crystals that made up its body seemed to darken slightly. "Protective equipment? You mean armor?" "Yes," Jiwoo said. "Everyone seems to be wearing it. We don't want to break protocol." Vexthal made a sound like breaking glass. Day-Ho realized after a moment that it was laughing. "You are not required to wear anything specific. Wear what makes you comfortable." "But why does everyone else wear armor?" Day-Ho asked. "Is there some danger we should know about?" The senator's body brightened again, returning to its normal blue color. "There are many traditions in the Senate, Ambassador. You will learn them in time. Come, we should not be late for your first session." It was clearly not an answer, but Day-Ho didn't push. They would figure it out soon enough. The Senate chamber was breathtaking. It was a sphere, with seats arranged in rings that went up the walls and even across the ceiling. Gravity fields kept delegates in their seats no matter which direction they faced. In the center was an open space where speakers could address the entire assembly. Vexthal led them to 2 seats near the middle ring. "These are the human seats," it explained. "Every species has a designated location based on when they joined and their population size. As provisional members, you are here in the observation section." Day-Ho sat down carefully, testing the gravity field. It held him firmly in place, even though his seat was at a 45-degree angle to the floor. Jiwoo sat beside him, gripping the armrests tightly. Around them, hundreds of aliens took their seats. Day-Ho tried to count the different species but gave up after reaching 50. The variety was incredible, and every single one wore armor. A being that looked like a giant insect with 6 arms settled into the seat directly across from them. Its armor was black and covered with spikes. Through the transparent faceplate of its helmet, Day-Ho could see multiple eyes that watched them with obvious interest. So the humans finally arrive, the insect said. Its voice was translated into English by the chamber's systems. I am Ambassador Krelon. I voted against your membership. Daeho kept his expression neutral. He had expected hostility from some quarters. I hope we can change your mind through our actions, Ambassador. Doubtful, Krelon said. Your species is too fragile. Look at you, sitting there with no protection at all. What kind of delegates come to the Senate without armor? It shows how little you understand. Before Daeho could respond, a deep tone rang through the chamber. All conversation stopped instantly. A holographic display appeared in the center of the chamber, showing a being made entirely of flowing energy. The 743rd session of the Galactic Senate is now in order, the energy being announced. Today we welcome provisional members from the planet Earth. Humanity, please stand and be recognized. Daeho and Jiwoo stood. Every alien in the chamber turned to look at them. The weight of hundreds of eyes was almost physical. Ambassador Daeho, you may speak, the energy being said. Daeho took a breath. Thank you, Senate Leader. My people are honored to join this assembly. We come in peace, with open minds and hearts. We hope to learn from you and to contribute what we can to the galactic community. We know we are young compared to most species here. We ask for your patience as we learn your ways. A murmur ran through the chamber. Daeho couldn't tell if it was approval or criticism. Brief and humble, said a voice from somewhere above them. Perhaps the humans will surprise us. Or perhaps they will prove too weak for the realities of Senate politics, Krelon said loudly. Several other voices joined in, some supporting the humans, others questioning their readiness. The debate began to grow heated. Daeho noticed that, as the aliens argued, many of them gestured aggressively. Some pounded on their armrests. Others pointed accusingly at each other. The Senate leader called for order. We will now proceed to today's agenda. The first matter is a trade dispute between the Merchants Guild of Sector 7 and the Mining Collective of Sector 12. Daeho sat back down, relieved that attention had shifted away from humanity. Jiwoo leaned close to him. Did you see how angry they got just talking about us? She whispered. And we haven't even done anything yet. Daeho nodded. Politics is the same everywhere, I suppose. Passion and conflict. But why the armor? Jiwoo insisted. That's what I can't figure out, it's just words. Why would anyone need protection during a debate? It was a good question. Daeho watched the Senate leader introduce the trade dispute representatives. Two aliens moved to the center of the chamber to present their cases. Both wore elaborate armor that gleamed under the lights. He had a feeling they would learn the answer very soon, and somehow he suspected he wouldn't like it. The trade dispute seemed simple enough at first. A merchant ship had delivered mining equipment that broke down after only 3 months. The mining collective wanted a refund. The Merchants Guild claimed the equipment was damaged by improper use. Both sides presented data and contracts and testimony from witnesses. Daeho listened carefully, taking notes on his tablet. This was exactly the kind of economic negotiation that happened on Earth all the time. He was beginning to relax. Maybe galactic politics weren't so different from human politics after all. The merchant representative, a slug-like creature in silver armor, finished presenting its case. The contract clearly states that warranty is void if equipment is used outside specified parameters. The mining collective exceeded those parameters on day 1. The mining representative, a being made of what looked like living rock, stood up in the center of the chamber. That is a lie, it shouted. Its voice boomed through the translation systems. We followed every instruction exactly. Your equipment is simply inferior. How dare you question our quality? The merchant shouted back. My guild has served this Senate for 300 years without complaint. Then perhaps you have grown careless in your old age, the rock creature said. The tension in the room changed instantly. Daeho felt it like a pressure wave. Around the chamber, delegates leaned forward in their seats. Some made aggressive gestures at the two beings in the center. The merchant's slug-like body turned dark red. Careless? You dare call us careless? Your collective is known throughout the sector for cutting corners and blaming others. And your guild is known for selling garbage to honest workers. The rock creature bellowed. Then something happened that Daeho would never forget. The merchant reached for the tablet it had been reading from and threw it at the rock creature with surprising force. The tablet flew through the air and smashed against the rock creature's chest armor. It shattered into pieces that scattered across the floor. The rock creature didn't even flinch. Jiwoo gasped beside Daeho. He felt his own mouth fall open in shock. Did that really just happen? In the Senate chamber? During an official session? But no one else seemed surprised. The other delegates watched with interest, but no one called for order. No one objected. The Senate leader simply observed from its position above the chamber. The rock creature bent down and picked up a piece of the broken tablet. It threw the piece back at the merchant harder. The fragment bounced off the merchant's silver armor with a loud clang. Is that the best you can do? The rock creature taunted. Now other delegates began to join in. A being from the upper rings threw a data crystal down at the merchant. Another threw what looked like a ceremonial staff at the rock creature. Objects flew through the air from all directions. Some were small and light. Others were heavy and dangerous looking. Every single projectile bounced harmlessly off armor or energy shields. No one was getting hurt, but the violence was real and shocking. Daeho sat frozen in his seat. This couldn't be normal. This couldn't be how the Galactic Senate operated. But everyone around them seemed completely calm about it. Some delegates were even cheering and encouraging the fighters. A heavy metal sphere came flying toward their section. Daeho didn't have time to think. He grabbed Jiwoo and pulled her down just as the sphere passed over their heads. It hit the wall behind them with a loud crash. What is happening? Jiwoo said, her voice shaking. This is insane. Krelon, the insect ambassador who sat across from them, laughed at their reaction. Welcome to real politics, humans. This is a mild dispute. You should see what happens during a war authorization vote. The violence continued for another 10 minutes. Then just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The rock creature and the merchant returned to their positions in the center of the chamber. Both were completely unharmed thanks to their armor. They weren't even breathing hard. The Senate leader spoke in its calm, measured voice. We will now vote on the trade dispute. All in favor of requiring the Merchants Guild to refund the mining collective. Indicate now. Lights appeared throughout the chamber as delegates voted. The whole thing was conducted as if nothing unusual had happened. As if physical violence was just a normal part of debate. The vote ended. The mining collective won. The merchant bowed slightly to the rock creature, and both left the center of the chamber to return to their seats. They passed each other without any sign of continued hostility. Daeho sat back in his seat, his heart still pounding. He looked at Jiwoo. Her face was pale, and her hands gripped the armrest so tightly that her knuckles were white. The session continued with several more minor votes and announcements. Nothing else became violent, but Daeho and Jiwoo barely heard any of it. They were both too busy trying to process what they had witnessed. Finally, after 2 more hours, the session ended. The Senate leader dismissed the assembly, and delegates began filing out of the chamber. Everyone chatted pleasantly with each other, even the merchant and the rock creature who had been throwing things minutes before. Vexthal appeared beside them. Come, I will escort you back to your quarters. They followed the crystalline senator in silence through the corridors. Daeho's mind was racing. He had so many questions he didn't even know where to start. When they reached the human quarters, Daeho finally spoke. Senator Vexthal, we need to talk about what happened in the chamber. I expected as much, Vexthal said. Come inside. This conversation should be private. The human quarters were comfortable but small. 2 bedrooms connected to a shared living space with a view of the stars. Vexthal moved to the window and seemed to gather its thoughts. You want to know why we wear armor, the senator said. Yes, Daeho said firmly, and why violence is allowed during Senate sessions. On Earth, if delegates started throwing things at each other, security would arrest them immediately. How can you have civilized debate when people are attacking each other? Vexthal's body pulsed with light, cycling through different shades of blue. I forget sometimes that you are truly new to all this. Let me ask you a question first. When you debate on Earth, when you argue passionately about something important, what do you feel? Anger sometimes, Daeho admitted. Frustration, strong emotions. And what do you do with those feelings? We control them. We use words to express disagreement, not violence. Control them, Vexthal repeated. Yes, that is the word I was looking for. You control your feelings. You choose not to act on them physically. Of course, Jiwoo said. That's what civilized beings do. Vexthal made that sound like breaking glass again. It's laugh. Civilized. Another interesting word. Tell me, Ambassador Representative, can you choose not to blink when something moves toward your eyes? Deho frowned. No, that's a reflex. It's automatic. Exactly, Vexthal said. For every species in this Senate except yours, physical aggression during passionate disagreement is also automatic. It is not a choice. It is a reflex built into our biology. The words hung in the air. Deho felt his understanding of the galaxy shift. You mean it's involuntary? Jiwoo asked quietly. They can't help it? Correct. When we feel strong disagreement, when we engage in heated debate, our bodies respond with physical aggression. We do not choose to throw things or strike out. It simply happens. Democracy evolved on our worlds alongside the understanding that this would occur. We wear armor because to not wear armor would be to risk serious injury or death every time we gathered to make decisions. Deho sat down heavily on the couch, but humans don't have that reflex. No, Vexthal said. You do not. In all the galaxy, in all the thousands of species we have encountered, humans are the only ones who can experience intense disagreement without involuntary physical violence. You are the only ones who can debate without armor. That's why Krelon thinks we're deficient, Deho said slowly. He thinks something is wrong with us because we don't fight. Many share his view. They believe that true passion must include physical expression. A species that can suppress such fundamental responses seems unnatural to them. Dangerous even. Jiwoo shook her head in wonder. We're not suppressing anything. We just never had that reflex in the first place. Which makes you unique, Vexthal said. And in this Senate, unique is not always welcomed. News of humanity's unusual nature spread through the Senate station, faster than Deho expected. By the next morning, every delegate seemed to know that humans could debate without fighting. Some found it fascinating, others found it deeply disturbing. Deho was in the human quarters reviewing reports when his communication panel chimed. The face that appeared on the screen belonged to a woman he didn't recognize. She had sharp features and confident eyes. Ambassador Deho, my name is Bo-Ra. I'm a human negotiator based on the outer colonies. The diplomatic corps sent me to assist with the situation here. Situation? Deho asked. We've only been here 2 days, Bo-Ra smiled slightly. And in 2 days, you've already become the most talked about delegates in the Senate. There are 3 motions being prepared to revoke your provisional membership. Krelon is leading the effort. Deho felt his stomach sink. On what grounds? That humans are emotionally deficient. That a species without proper passion cannot be trusted to make life and death decisions. That your calmness is actually a sign of dangerous psychological abnormality. That's ridiculous, Jiwoo said from across the room. We feel everything they feel. We just don't hit people about it. I know, Bo-Ra said, but try explaining that to species who can't imagine any other way. I'm docking within the hour. We need to develop a strategy before the next Senate session. When Bo-Ra arrived, she brought energy and purpose with her. She spread out data files across the table in their quarters and began talking immediately. The problem isn't that they don't understand us. It's that understanding us scares them. We break their fundamental assumptions about how intelligent beings work. So how do we fix that? Deho asked. We don't try to explain ourselves. We demonstrate our value. Show them what humans can do that no one else can. Jiwoo leaned forward. Like what? Like negotiate between parties that literally cannot be in the same room without violence. Bo-Ra pulled up a file. It showed 2 species Deho didn't recognize. One looked like a floating jellyfish with tentacles. The other was covered in thick fur and walked on 4 legs. The drifters and the walkers have been in conflict for 15 years over a border system. Both claim it based on old treaties. Every attempt at negotiation has failed because their delegates attack each other within minutes of starting talks. They've fought 3 small wars over this and a 4th is brewing. And you think humans could help? Deho asked. I think humans are the only ones who can help. If we sit between them, if we remain calm while they rage, we force them to engage with us instead of each other. It might create enough space for actual dialogue. Or it might get us killed, Jiwoo pointed out. No one else is willing to sit in a room with both of them without armor. Bo-Ra met her eyes. That's exactly why we need to do it. To show that human composure isn't weakness. It's strength. Deho considered the idea. It was risky, maybe even foolish. But Bo-Ra was right about one thing. They needed to prove themselves quickly, or humanity would lose its Senate seat before it even got started. Set it up, he said. All three of us will mediate. The next day they gathered in a small conference room. The drifter ambassador floated near one wall, its tentacles curling and uncurling constantly. The walker ambassador stood near the opposite wall, its fur bristling with aggression. Both wore heavy armor. Daeho, Bora, and Jiwoo sat at a table in the center of the room. They wore no protection at all. Thank you for agreeing to this meeting, Bora began. We know you've tried negotiations before. We hope that human mediation might offer a fresh approach. Humans, the drifter said through its translator. The species without passion. How can you understand what this conflict means to us? We may not experience passion the same way you do, Daeho said calmly. But we understand that this border system matters deeply to both of you. We're here to listen and help find common ground. There is no common ground, the walker growled. The system is ours by right of first settlement. The drifters are thieves who want to steal what we built. Thieves? The drifter's voice rose sharply. Your people abandoned that system for 2 centuries. We maintained it, improved it, made it valuable again. Now you want it back only because we did the work. The walker's body tensed. Before Daeho could react, it grabbed a data pad from the table and threw it at the drifter. The pad flew through the air and bounced off the drifter's energy shield. Jiwoo flinched but didn't move from her seat. Daeho kept his eyes on both delegates. I understand you're angry, Bora said, her voice steady. But throwing things won't change the facts. Let's talk about the timeline. The Walker people first settled the system 340 years ago, correct? Yes, the Walker said, still glaring at the drifter. We built the first orbital stations. And you left the system 220 years ago due to economic pressures? We didn't abandon it. We temporarily relocated. The drifter made a sound like water boiling. Temporary? 2 centuries is not temporary. We found empty stations falling apart. We thought the builders were dead. Another object flew through the air. This time it was a ceremonial staff from the drifter's side. The walker's armor absorbed the impact easily. The 3 humans remained perfectly still. They took notes. They asked questions. When insults were thrown, they acknowledged the feelings but redirected to facts. When objects flew, they occasionally ducked but never retaliated, never showed fear. An hour passed. Then 2 hours. The violence began to slow. The delegates seemed almost frustrated by the humans' complete lack of reaction. It was like fighting shadows. Nothing they threw got a rise out of the mediators. Let me see if I understand both positions, Daeho said after nearly 3 hours. The walkers believe they never truly abandoned the system, just temporarily left it. The drifters believe that 2 centuries of absence and their own investment gives them legitimate claim. Is that accurate? Both delegates agreed grudgingly. Then perhaps the answer isn't about who owns the system but about how to share its benefits, Bora suggested. The walkers have historical claim. The drifters have investment and current presence. What if we structured an arrangement that honors both? Share? The walker said. We don't want to share what's ours. Neither do we, the drifter added. But you're both willing to go to war over it, Jiwoo said quietly. How many lives have already been lost? How many more will die if this continues? The room fell silent. For the first time since the meeting started, both delegates seemed to actually think instead of just reacting. What kind of arrangement? The drifter asked finally. They talked for another hour. The humans proposed a joint administration system. The walkers would regain some control over the orbital stations they originally built. The drifters would maintain authority over the improvements they had made. Both would share the system's economic output, based on a formula that accounted for historical claim and current investment. It wasn't perfect. Both sides complained. Objects were thrown several more times. But slowly, grudgingly, the outline of an agreement began to form. When the meeting finally ended, both delegates left without violence. They hadn't signed anything yet, but they had agreed to present the proposal to their governments. It was more progress than 15 years of previous negotiations had achieved. Daeho, Bora, and Jiwoo sat alone in the conference room afterward. They were exhausted. Jiwoo had a bruise on her arm from where she'd been grazed by a flying object, but they had done it. Word of this will spread, Bora said. Every delegate who thought humans were weak just got proven wrong. Will it be enough? Jiwoo asked. To save our Senate membership? I don't know, Daeho admitted. But it's a start. The door chimed. Fexthal entered the room. its crystalline body shimmering with what Deho had learned to recognize as approval. "I watched the entire session," the senator said. "What you did today was remarkable. 3 hours in a room with the drifters and walkers, and you survived without armor. More than survived. You made progress. We just stayed calm and listened," Bora said. "Just," Vextal repeated. "You say just as if it were a small thing. No other species could have done what you did. Do you understand that? No one else in this entire Senate could sit calmly while being attacked and continue to focus on solutions." "It's not that special," Jiwoo said. "It's just how we are." "That," Vextal said, "is exactly what makes it special. You don't even realize how extraordinary you are." The senator moved toward the door, then paused. "The vote on your membership has been moved up. It will happen in 3 days. Kreelon is pushing hard for your expulsion, but after today, many senators are reconsidering. What you do in the next session may determine humanity's future in the Senate." After Vextal left, the 3 humans looked at each other. "No pressure," Jiwoo said with a weak smile. Deho stood and walked to the window. Outside, stars filled the darkness of space. Somewhere out there was Earth, waiting to hear if humanity would be accepted into the larger galactic community. They had 3 days to make their case. 3 days to prove that calm wasn't weakness, that control wasn't deficiency, that humanity deserved its place among the stars. He hoped it would be enough. The Senate chamber filled quickly on the day of the vote. Every seat was occupied, and additional delegates crowded the observation decks. Word had spread about the humans and their successful mediation. Everyone wanted to see what would happen next. Deho took his seat beside Jiwoo and Bora. He noticed that more delegates were watching them openly now, not trying to hide their curiosity. Some nodded in greeting. Others still glared with suspicion. Kreelon sat directly across from them as usual. The insect ambassador's armor gleamed under the chamber lights. Through the transparent faceplate, Deho could see all 6 of its eyes focused on him with obvious hostility. The Senate leader called the session to order. "Today we vote on the full membership status of humanity. Before the vote, both supporting and opposing delegates may speak. Ambassador Kreelon has requested to speak first." Kreelon rose from its seat and moved to the center of the chamber. Its 6 arms gestured as it spoke, making its armor rattle. "Fellow senators, I stand before you to warn against a dangerous mistake. The humans seem peaceful. They seem calm and reasonable. But I ask you to consider what this really means." Deho kept his expression neutral, though his heart was beating faster. "Every species in this Senate shares a fundamental trait," Kreelon continued. "When we care deeply about something, our bodies react. We fight for what matters. This is healthy. This is natural. This is how intelligent beings prove their commitment to their beliefs." Several delegates made sounds of agreement. Objects clattered as some hit their armrests in approval. "But humans," Kreelon said, pointing at them, "feel nothing. They sit calmly while being attacked. They don't react with proper passion. Some call this control. I call it absence. They are emotionally hollow." "That's not true," Jiwoo whispered angrily beside Deho. He put a hand on her arm, keeping her seated. "And there is more," Kreelon said. "I have studied human history. These beings claim they don't have violent reflexes, but their past is filled with wars, genocides, and horrors. They do have violence in them. They simply hide it, suppress it. What kind of species suppresses its natural responses? I will tell you what kind. A dangerous kind, a deceptive kind." More sounds of agreement rippled through the chamber. Deho felt the mood shifting against them. "They say they mediated between the drifters and walkers. Yes, they sat in a room and took notes while being attacked. But is that mediation? Or is it just being too cold to care when violence happens around you? Real passion, real commitment requires physical investment. The humans have shown us they lack this fundamental quality. I say they are unfit for Senate membership." Kreelon reached down and picked up a ceremonial blade from its belt. The blade was blunted, meant for display rather than combat, but it was still heavy metal. Without warning, Kreelon threw it directly at Deho. The blade spun through the air. Jiwoo gasped. Bora started to move. But Deho had been watching Kreelon's body language. He had seen the throw coming. His hand shot up and caught the blade by its handle, stopping it inches from his face. The chamber went completely silent. Deho stood slowly, still holding the blade. He walked calmly to the center of the chamber and set it down on the floor in front of Kreelon. Then he looked up at all the delegates watching from every angle. Ambassador Krelon is right about one thing, Deho said, his voice carrying through the chamber. Humans do have violence in our history. Terrible violence. We have fought wars. We have hurt each other in countless ways. But that is precisely why we learned control. He began to walk in a slow circle, addressing the entire Senate. You say that physical aggression during disagreement is natural for you, that it's involuntary like blinking, and I believe you. But for humans, violence is voluntary. We can choose it or reject it. And because we can choose, we had to learn when violence was appropriate and when it was not. How convenient, Krelon said. To claim control when really you feel nothing. Deho turned to face the insect directly. I felt anger when you called my people emotionally hollow. I felt it burning in my chest. I feel anger right now, standing here listening to you question our fitness. But feeling anger and acting on anger are two different things. I chose not to throw your blade back at you. Not because I don't care, but because I care about something more important than my anger. He gestured around the chamber. You built this Senate. You created a place where different species could gather and make decisions together. That is an incredible achievement. But you also built it with the assumption that violence during debate was inevitable. You made armor mandatory because you couldn't imagine any other way. Deho picked up the blade again and held it up for everyone to see. Humans don't need armor, not because we lack passion, but because we learned that democracy works better when violence is not automatic. We learned that the strongest person isn't the one who fights every time they feel angry. The strongest person is the one who feels angry and chooses their response. He set the blade down again and looked up at the Senate leader. You asked if humans are fit for this Senate. I say we are fit to help this Senate become more than it is. We can teach what we learned. We can show that armor in a debate chamber doesn't have to be necessary. We can help you build a democracy where ideas defeat ideas, not where fists defeat fists. Arrogant, someone shouted from the upper levels. You've been here 3 days and you want to change us? I don't want to change who you are, Deho said. I want to offer you a choice you didn't know you had. Bora stood and moved to join Deho in the center. The mediation with the drifters and walkers worked because we gave them space to be angry without being violent. We absorbed their aggression and reflected back calm. Over time, they began to match our energy instead of feeding off each other's rage. That's not coldness. That's creating a space for reason to exist alongside emotion. Jiwoo stood as well, completing the triangle of humans in the chamber center. You say we're deficient because we don't fight when we debate. But maybe the question isn't what's wrong with us. Maybe the question is what could be right for all of you if you didn't have to fight. The chamber erupted in noise. Delegates shouted arguments back and forth. Some threw objects at the humans. Others threw objects at delegates they disagreed with. The usual chaos of passionate Senate debate. But Deho, Bora, and Jiwoo stood calmly in the center of it all. When objects flew toward them, they moved smoothly out of the way. When insults were shouted, they listened without responding in kind. They were an island of stillness in a storm of aggression. Gradually, the chaos began to slow. Delegates stopped throwing things not because they ran out of ammunition, but because the humans' complete lack of reaction made it feel pointless. It was hard to maintain rage against targets that wouldn't engage with it. The Senate leader called for order. We will now vote. All in favor of granting humanity full Senate membership. Indicate now. Lights appeared throughout the chamber. Deho watched them, trying to count. It looked close. Very close. The voting period ended. The Senate leader was silent for a long moment, calculating the results. The motion passes, it finally announced. By a margin of 7 votes, humanity is granted full Senate membership. A roar of noise filled the chamber. Some delegates celebrated. Others protested. Krelon's armor clattered as it stormed out of the chamber without a word. Vexthal appeared beside the humans. Congratulations. Though I should warn you, the narrow margin means you will face continued opposition. We expected that, Deho said. Change is always hard. There is one more thing, Vexthal said. The Senate has added a requirement for your membership. Humans must maintain cultural observers throughout the Senate station. You must always have representatives available for mediation and conflict resolution. They're using us as peacekeepers, Bora said with a slight smile. Smart. And they're watching to see if we can really do what we claimed, Jiwoo added. If we can help reduce violence in Senate proceedings. Deho looked around the chamber. Despite the narrow vote, he felt hopeful. They had their chance. Now they had to prove they deserved it. Over the next few weeks, requests for human mediation began to arrive. Small disputes at first, arguments over committee assignments, debates about meeting schedules. But each one was an opportunity to demonstrate that calm negotiation could work. 3 species approached them about learning human emotional control techniques. They wanted to understand how to separate feeling from action. Daeho, Bora, and Jiwoo began holding small training sessions, teaching breathing exercises and mindfulness practices. It was slow work. Most species found it extremely difficult to override their natural reflexes, but some made progress. A few delegates began attending Senate sessions with lighter armor, testing whether they could control their physical responses. The drifters and walkers signed their agreement. It wasn't perfect and both sides still argued about details, but the war was over. They requested human mediators to remain involved during the implementation phase. Krelon remained hostile, but even he couldn't deny the results. Violence in the Senate chambers had decreased by 30% since humans arrived. Debates were shorter because less time was wasted on physical confrontations. Decisions were being made more efficiently. One morning, Vexthal visited the human. 6 months had passed since humanity gained Senate membership. Daeho stood in his new office overlooking the main Senate chamber and thought about how much had changed. As chief mediator, he now had a staff of 12 humans and access to resources he'd never imagined. The position gave him real power to influence how the Senate operated. Jiwoo had taken over the training program, teaching emotional control techniques to any delegate who requested them. She now had 3 assistant instructors and a waiting list of students. Bora coordinated the growing network of human mediators stationed throughout the Senate complex. But the biggest change was happening in the Senate chamber itself. Today would mark the first armor-optional session. 12 species had volunteered to participate without protective equipment, supported by human mediators positioned throughout the room. It was a trial run, a test of whether real change was possible. Daeho walked down to the chamber early. Delegates were already arriving, and he could feel the nervous energy in the air. This was historic. For the first time in Senate history, some members would debate without armor. The volunteers were easy to spot. They wore formal clothing but no protection. They stood out like bright colors against the usual metallic and shielded crowd. Some looked confident. Others looked terrified. Vexthal approached Daeho, its crystalline body glowing with what he now recognized as excitement. I never thought I would see this day. When I first met you 6 months ago, I did not believe humans could make such a difference. The real test comes now, Daeho said. If violence breaks out, if anyone gets hurt, the experiment fails. We might not get another chance. Then we must ensure nothing goes wrong. The session began with routine announcements and minor votes. Everything proceeded normally, which meant objects occasionally flew through the air and delegates shouted at each other. But the unarmored volunteers stayed calm, mimicking the breathing techniques Jiwoo had taught them. The human mediators positioned around the chamber watched carefully, ready to intervene if needed. An hour passed without incident, then 2 hours. Daeho began to relax slightly. Perhaps this would work after all. Then the emergency alert sounded. The Senate leader's voice cut through the chamber with unusual urgency. A colony ship has been destroyed in the Outer Rim. 7,000 dead. Initial investigation suggests weapons fire from either the Coastal Federation or the Mountain Alliance. Both species deny responsibility. The chamber exploded into chaos. The Coastal Federation and Mountain Alliance had been rivals for centuries. Any conflict between them threatened to destabilize entire sectors. Delegates leaped from their seats, shouting accusations. Objects flew in every direction. The Mountain Alliance ambassador, a being covered in thick scales, roared at the Coastal Federation representative. Your people have wanted war for years. Now you murder civilians and deny it? Lies, the Coastal Federation rep shrieked. This is a false flag attack. You destroyed your own ship to blame us. Both ambassadors wore heavy armor. They charged at each other in the center of the chamber. Security systems activated, trying to separate them, but rage had made them stronger than the protective fields. The violence spread. Delegates who supported the Mountain Alliance threw things at Coastal Federation supporters. Return fire came immediately. Within seconds, the chamber had become a war zone. Even delegates not involved in the dispute got caught up in the chaos. The unarmored volunteers panicked. Several ran for the exits. Others tried to duck behind seats. A young delegate from a species Daiho didn't recognize took a heavy metal rod to the shoulder and cried out in pain. Blood appeared on its clothing. "Everyone stop!" Daiho shouted, but his voice was lost in the noise. He looked around desperately. The human mediators were trying to help, but there were too few of them and too much violence. This was exactly what the opponents of armor-optional sessions had predicted. Someone would get hurt, maybe killed, and it would set back everything they'd worked for. Then Daiho did something he knew was foolish. He ran to the center of the chamber, placing himself between the Mountain Alliance and Coastal Federation ambassadors. They were both larger than him, stronger, and wearing armor that could crush him easily. "Stop!" he shouted directly at them. "Both of you, stop now!" The Mountain Alliance ambassador's massive hand swung toward him. Daiho didn't move. The hand stopped inches from his face, the ambassador's eyes going wide as it realized what it had almost done. "You will kill me if you continue," Daiho said calmly, though his heart pounded so hard he could hear it in his ears. "And then you will have to explain to the entire galaxy why you murdered an unarmored mediator during a Senate session." The Coastal Federation rep had frozen as well. Both ambassadors stared at Daiho standing calmly between them. "I know you're angry," Daiho continued, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. 7,000 beings are dead. That is a tragedy beyond measure. But adding more violence, more death, will not bring them back. Step away from each other. Let us investigate what really happened before we tear this Senate apart. Bora and Jiwoo had joined him now, forming a human barrier between the two ambassadors. They stood unarmored, unprotected, completely vulnerable. Their calmness was stark against the rage surrounding them. "You're insane," the Mountain Alliance ambassador said, but it had lowered its arms. "Maybe," Daiho admitted, "but I'm also right. Violence now helps no one." Slowly, the two ambassadors backed away from each other. The fighting in the chamber began to calm as other delegates noticed what was happening in the center. The presence of unarmored humans standing peacefully in the middle of the chaos created a psychological anchor, just as Daiho had hoped. Within minutes, the chamber was quiet again. Delegates returned to their seats, breathing hard. The injured volunteer was being treated by medical staff. The wound wasn't serious, but it had been close. The Senate leader spoke. "We will investigate the colony ship incident immediately. Both the Mountain Alliance and Coastal Federation will submit all relevant data. Until the investigation is complete, no military action will be authorized. This session is adjourned." As the chamber emptied, Daiho felt his legs begin to shake. The adrenaline was wearing off, and he realized how close he had come to being seriously hurt. Bora put a hand on his shoulder. "That was incredibly brave and incredibly stupid," she said. "Mostly stupid," Jiwoo agreed. "But it worked." Over the next 3 days, human investigators worked with Senate security to analyze the colony ship destruction. They found evidence that neither the Mountain Alliance nor Coastal Federation was responsible. It had been an accident, a catastrophic engine failure that mimicked weapons fire. The finding prevented a war. It also proved something important. The crisis had been real and immediate, but human calmness had helped prevent it from spiraling out of control. The Senate had witnessed firsthand the value of beings who could stand in the middle of violence without adding to it. 2 weeks later, Krelon appeared at Daiho's office. The insect ambassador stood in the doorway, its armor gleaming as always. "I owe you an apology," Krelon said without preamble. Daiho looked up in surprise. "Ambassador Krelon, please come in." Krelon entered but didn't sit. "I was wrong about your people. I thought your calmness meant you didn't care. I thought lack of physical aggression meant weakness. The colony ship crisis taught me otherwise." "Thank you," Daiho said simply. "I want to request something," Krelon continued. "My people, We fight more than most species. Our instinct for violence is very strong. But I've been watching your training sessions. I've seen delegates learn to control responses they thought were unchangeable. Could you teach my people this? Daeho felt a surge of hope. If Krelon, the strongest opponent of human membership, was willing to learn from them, real change was possible. Of course. Jiwoo can work with your delegation to develop a program suited to your species. It won't be easy, Krelon warned. My people are proud of our warrior traditions. Many will resist. Change is never easy, Daeho agreed. But it's possible. That's what matters. Over the following months, more species requested training. More delegates began attending sessions without full armor. Some wore lighter protection. Others wore none at all. The change was gradual, uneven, and sometimes frustratingly slow, but it was happening. A year after humanity joined the Senate, Daeho stood in the chamber and counted. Nearly half the delegates now attended sessions without armor. Debates were still passionate, voices still raised, but physical violence had decreased by 70%. Decisions were being made more efficiently. The Senate was functioning better than it had in decades. Jiwoo stood beside him, watching a training session through the chamber windows. Young delegates from a dozen species practiced breathing exercises together. We didn't just join the galactic community, she said quietly. We're changing it. Daeho thought about his first day at the Senate, when everything had been strange and confusing, when the armor had made no sense and violence seemed inevitable. Now the chamber was full of delegates who were learning that there was another way. No, he said finally. We're not changing them. We're reminding them what they could always become. The capacity for control, for choosing peace over violence, that's not unique to humans.